Good morning and welcome. Welcome to everybody at the Friendly House and welcome to everybody on Zoom. Thank you for everybody who helped prepare the meeting and get us off to a little late start, but we'll be fine. So I want to start out by saying that HTP believes strongly in freedom of speech, but the views expressed by myself, today's speaker, anybody here or on Zoom, are not the official views of the humanists of Greater Portland. And what is humanism? It is a non-theistic philosophy informed by science, inspired by art, and motivated by compassion. Humanists strive to lead meaningful and ethical lives. We use reason and empathy to guide our decisions and actions. We strive to live meaningful lives because we honor the fact that this is the only life of which we are certain. As humanists, we affirm the dignity and worth of all people. I'm going to say that again. As humanists, we affirm the dignity and worth of all people. I think that in today's world, I'm finding that to be more and more important to keep in my heart and in the forefront of my mind. We do this not only to acknowledge that all humans have accomplished in the arts, sciences, and humanities, but also simply for the possibility for peace and well-being when people cooperate and interact with respect for one another. So, compassion, compassion, compassion. That seems to be the word of the day for me a lot. And I believe, Anne, are you the reader today? Yep.
I'm doing one on its travel, books, and music, but it's only 2 pages, so there we go. This is one on travel. Try to travel, otherwise you may become racist, and you may end up believing that your skin is the only one to be right, that your language is the most romantic, and that you were the first to be the first. Travel, because if you don't travel, then your thoughts won't be strengthened, won't get filled with ideas. Your dreams will be born with fragile legs, and then you end up believing in TV shows and in those who invent enemies that fit perfectly with your nightmares to make you live in terror. Travel, because travel teaches to say good morning to everyone, regardless of which sun we come from. Travel, because travel teaches to say goodnight to everybody, regardless of the darkness that we carry inside. Travel, because traveling teaches to resist, not to depend, to accept others, not just for who they are, but also for what they can never be, to know what we are capable of, to feel part of a family, beyond borders, beyond traditions and culture. Traveling teaches us to be beyond. Travel, otherwise you end up believing that you are made only for a panorama, and instead, inside you, there are wonderful landscapes still to visit. That's from Gio Evan, who is an Italian poet. And here we have Don't Go Into the Library by Alberto Rios, 1952. The library is dangerous. Don't go in. If you do, you know what will happen. It's like a pet store or a bakery. Every single time you'll come out there holding something in your arms. Those novels with their big eyes, and those no-nonsense, all-muscle greyhounds and Dobermans, all nonfiction and business. Cuddly when they're young, but then the first page is turned. The donut scent of all knowledge. The aroma of coffee being made in all those books. Something for everyone. The deli offerings of civilization itself. The library is the book of books. It's concrete and woodland glass covers, keeping within them the very big, very long history of everything. Reminds me of that big, beautiful bill. Sorry. Won't go there. You may not come out the same person who went in. And here's a little ditty on music. Oh, music, sweet and tender, your touch can heal, your voice can render, a language of the soul, forever tender, a gift from the cosmos, yours to remember.
Thank you. Thank you, Anne. That was great. All right, so I would like to introduce today's speaker. We have Will Aitchison, He is a labor lawyer, a longtime Willamette Heights resident, and president of the Coalition to Protect Forest Park. He has dedicated countless hours protecting Forest Park, and his presentation today is entitled Issues Facing Our Beloved Forest Park.
Thank you all for coming. 10 o'clock on a Sunday morning. This is very impressive, actually. Just a little bit about how I got into Forest Park and a little bit more about me, because I'm going to end with sort of a call to action for you guys. I've lived in Willamette Heights for, I think, about 27 years now, which makes me a newcomer in Willamette Heights. That's kind of the way that neighborhood is, and became very interested in Forest Park when there were proposals to increase the amount of mountain biking in Forest Park, and got involved in that whole process, which went on for years and years and continues to go on. And then PG made a proposal to run some additional power lines through Forest Park. And that's what got a group of us, we call ourselves the Coalition to Defend Forest Park. Really, we're just 8 people. And that's all. We don't have niceties like a bank account or anything like that, but we work really hard. That's what got us involved in this whole thing. And we've been dealing with PG for more than a year now. And I'll bring you up to speed on where that all is. My presentation today is going to be a little bit, I promise you not much, a little bit of history of Forest Park. I'm going to spend some time describing for you a truly remarkable document, the Forest Park Natural Resources Management Plan. This is a more than 200-page document that describes the circumstances under which there can be any development in Forest Park. I will then talk to you about PGE and why it looks like PGE is going to fail, at least for the present, in what it wanted to do. And then if we have time left, I'll get into the mountain biking thing, but only if we have time left. And as mentioned, I'll take questions like halfway through and at the end, but if you've got a really important question, we'll stop in the middle and I'll try to answer it. Okay? There we go. Okay, so briefly on the history of Forest Park. Forest Park has signs of Native American settlements that go back at least 10,000 years, but there's no recent history of Native Americans in Forest Park. Essentially, I'm being a little bit political here, they kind of all got genocided out or moved out of Forest Park. And Forest Park really didn't become settled again until the mid 1800s, 1850, 1860, in that range. I shouldn't say Forest Park. The area that is now Forest Park is much more accurate. The first person to play a key role in the development of Forest Park was Thomas Lamb Eliot, one of the early pioneers in the state of Oregon, who recommended that part of the land that is up at the end of what is now Thurman Street be preserved. That 1865. In 1903, as we're on the cusp of having what is really the equivalent of a World's Fair come right down the street here, 2 blocks away, as we're having that go on, there's a push to develop what's going on up the hill. There's logging that is going on. 32nd Street is platted and is handed out to the leading architects of the day to try to design whatever homes they might design. We had, I don't know if you've ever done an architectural tour of any area in Portland, but they're well worth it. And we did one on Willamette Heights and learned that the house in which we are living, the first inhabitants were a couple, the woman of whom went to the University of Oregon, won a contest as to who could pick the University of Oregon sports team's colors. And she is the one responsible for that ungainly, I graduated from the U of O, ungainly yellow and green. So at any rate, you can find all sorts of stuff like that out. So there's development push up the hill, and at the same time, what was then called the Municipal Parks Commission hired the Olmsted brothers to basically come up with a design for the city of Portland. The Olmsted brothers were the sons of the designer of Central Park and many other municipal parks around the country. Not much happens for a long time in the Forest Park area. There's a push to develop it. It doesn't really seem to go anywhere. Leif Erikson, which used to be Hillside, Leif Erikson has some houses sprout up, but some of them fall down as well because it's so steep. And really not much is going on except every once in a while. The city is foreclosing land that people owed money on and also receiving donations. So there's starting to be a lot of land up in the Forest Park area. And of course, there's logging in Forest Park. There's virtually no old growth trees in Forest Park. What you see are at best second growth trees up there. And much of this logging happened in the early 1900s. This actually is a picture of logging in Forest Park. And then we get into the 1940s, and this is where the action really starts. The Post-War Development Committee, which was a committee that was planning ahead for what Portland should look like after World War II, and Edgar Kaiser of the shipyard Kaisers, who had a tremendous civic commitment, they hired Robert Moses. That name familiar to most of it. Robert Moses turned New York City into what it is today. A lot of controversy about Robert Moses now, but at the time he was considered the leading municipal architect of the day. Moses in '44 recommended that the forested land become a park, and then in 1944 we see the first big push towards giving park protection to Forest Park, and that's when the City Club gets involved. The City Club, we have a lot to thank for what we have in Forest Park today. This just starts the City Club's involvement. Now, maybe the motivation wasn't quite as pure as we thought. You know, the City Club was considering things like more oil drilling in Forest Park. There was oil drilling in Forest Park, more logging and everything like that. And the City Club ended up concluding that land up there's not suitable for anything. So why don't we turn it into a park? And that is exactly what happened. An external group called the Committee of 50 people with a commitment to the park, made recommendations. And finally, in 1948, Forest Park becomes a park for the city of Portland. Now on to what I described as a remarkable document. There were no guidelines really in 1948 as to how the park could or could not be used. That came after 1995's Forest Park Natural Resources Management Plan. I'm probably going to call this the management plan all afternoon or all morning. Oh, you didn't know this was going into the afternoon, did you? No, all morning. And this was the product of a lot of work, years of research that involved all sorts of
biologists, geologists, foresters, community, special interest groups, for example, the off-road biking folks. All of these groups got together and put together this document that ended up being submitted to the city council and was passed as an ordinance by the city council. That's critically important because it means that variations from whatever is in the management plan have to be approved by the city council. And if there's to be any changes in the requirements of the plan, a new ordinance has to be prepared and passed. So that's a degree of protection you don't often see with respect to the rules as to how we can use parks. The commitments, there's a list of commitments made in the plan. I can sum them all up, and I'm using the plan's words here, by saying the commitment is to restore Forest Park to ancient forest status. That's the idea. And that phrase, ancient forest, just runs through the management plan. By the way, you can find the management plan online. I'm happy to email it to you. Most important page is 217 that has some requirements that you're going to see in a moment. But the whole idea here is we're not just going to draw a line around Forest Park and protect it. We're going to restore it to ancient forest status. And that's going to take work on our part. So I've got a long list here. I'm actually, because of time, not going to go through many of these, but you can see that what the plan does is to it's an expression of that ancient forest notion. Specifically, the plan says we're going to control recreation in order to enhance the high quality of the natural resource. We are in particular going to protect and enhance the interior forest habitat because that habitat type is unique and not found in any other urban park in the world. That statement is still true. There are bigger parks, but there are not parks like Forest Park anywhere around. We're going to monitor wildlife. We're going to monitor recreation. We're going to make sure that recreation doesn't get in the way of wildlife. We're going to come up with a sustainable resources program. All of these things are an expression of we want to, sorry about that. We want to preserve what we've got. We want to keep this. I've heard it referred to so many times as the jewel of Portland, and indeed it is. The city wanted or made a commitment to increase staffing, particularly in natural resources management. The goal was as well to buy other land, to take the pressure off Forest Park, enforce the rules with respect to cycling. Any of you who are out there hiking on Wildwood or Aspen or Wild Cherry or wherever you are, know the city isn't quite doing this, right? It's not terrible, but they're bike trails or bike ruts on all of these trails that are not intended for bicycle use. So that management plan passes in 1995. Divides the park into 3 management units, and they're going to be treated differently. We know the park, most of us in this room, only by the south unit. The south unit is where we have Lower Maclay, and this is where Leif Erikson starts, and that's where the whatever you call it. I guess I should depend on Gwen for the right name here. The Witch's Castle. Will that do? Okay. That's where we have all of those things in the south unit. That's where the most recreation is allowed. And it's not a lot, right? It's trails that you've got, but that's where the most recreation is allowed. The north unit up here, which if you think of it flowing in a southwest direction here, the line, and one side of it would be Germantown Road, and the other side would be Newberry Road. This is the area of the park that the plan says this is where we have to focus on an ancient forest to begin here. That's why there's so little in the way of recreation allowed in this north unit. I mean, there are some fire trails and there's wildwood, but there's not a whole lot else besides the fire trails and wildwood. And then in the central unit, which runs from Germantown Road down to Fire Lane 1 in here, central unit is kind of between the ancient forest and the more recreation. So this is all going to become important because where PGE wants to string its lines is from right about here. This is the Harborton substation for PGE. If you come out Highway 30 and you look down to your right after you've gone through Linton, you'll see it. It's the big pad of concrete with a lot of transformers on it. PGE wanted to run its lines this way and run them in the north unit. So that's why I spent a little bit of time on that issue. Here's just a short quote from the management plan saying the northern units have significant values not found in the south. Vision statement for the north unit is we're looking for peace, solitude, ruggedness, variety, beauty, and unpredictability of an urban wilderness. And if you've been out in the north unit, we're headed that direction, right? It's not like hiking on Mount Hood, but it's very impressive. Okay, so the management plan has ecological goals. These goals have to be complied with in order for there to be any development in Forest Park. And overall, the management of the forest must enhance, again, all these active verbs, right? Must enhance conservation, recreation, and education. And there are 4 aims. Maintain and enhance regional biodiversity. We'll talk about the number of species that are in Forest Park. Give not only a place for habitat for plants and animals, but also migration opportunities must be kept open. That'll become a big deal with PGE's power lines. Improve water quality and aquatic habitat. That'll become important with PGE because its proposal would have permanently filled in 2 wetlands and disrupted the only 2 streams in the area. And lastly, we're going to repair yet another one of these active verbs, right? We're going to repair damaged and fragmented natural systems. Those are the goals. If there are to be uses of Forest Park that do not do these things, then they fall under the heading of what the plan calls an exception. And in order to be an exception, something has to meet 5 criteria. And this is where the action was before the City Council on Forest Park. First, whatever this development is, has to meet the criteria for what are called minor amendments to the plan. Talk about those in a moment. Secondly, the development either has to be a park-related development. Let's think of this in terms of PGE now, right? Power lines is not a park-related development, right? Or no alternatives exist outside Forest Park for the proposal. Going to be a lot of action before the City Council on the word alternatives. Do they exist? Third, There's no other locations in the park where there'd be less harm done. That's actually not a factor in the PGE thing. Fourth, this one's critical. Any long-term adverse impacts of the proposed action on resource values must be fully mitigated, and here it comes, within the management unit. So if you are going to have permission to have an exception to do damage to the park because of your development, you're going to have to mitigate that damage in the same section of the park where you created the damage. And that's going to be very, very tough for PGE to deal with, because the north unit, there's no place for mitigation in the north unit. It's a forest. That's the whole idea. It's not like there's land that you can recover in some way. And so we'll talk about that a little bit more as well later. And then lastly, number 5, I'm not going to cover this because this gets us very deep into Portland zoning code. Suffice it to say, there are some additional zoning requirements that a development has to comply with. Okay, so that's the management plan. Those are the exceptions. We're going to pause for just a moment, and I'm going to bring you up to speed. I left you at 1995. I'm going to bring you up to speed to the present in terms of major things the city has and has not done. Okay, so 1995, management plan is adopted, and then the city club starts nagging the city. And this happens in 2010. 5 years later after the management plan. The City Club does a study, and it publishes a document called A Call to Action. It refers to the city's compliance with the management plan as dismal, and says in particular we're concerned that the core requirement, scientific analysis that would establish a baseline for future decisions, hasn't happened. Let me talk to you about that, because that really becomes important with the mountain biking thing. The whole idea, the City Club is saying, and it's buried in the management plan as well in many places, the whole idea is that when we're considering a development, we look at the science first, and then we do the development. And the science in this case means we need to understand what we have on our hands here. How many species do we have? What are the threats to those species or lack of threats to those species? What's the plant life look like? How much in the way of invasive plants do we have? How can we control those? What about the geology? Because the geology in Forest Park varies over this, very large area. We need to know what we have on our hands, is the message out of the management plan before we talk about any development in Forest Park. And you're going to see this come through time and time again. The City Club ends by saying, look, one of the things you promised to do is a comprehensive recreation survey and a comprehensive sustainable resources plan. You haven't done either over the last 15 years. The most you've done is very piecemeal efforts. Okay, so that's 2010. And by the end of 2010, the City Council sprung to action and funded all of these things. Nah. Where do you think we are? This is Portland. Okay. Sorry, that was too easy. So the 2010 conclusions from the City Club, perpetual budget shortcoming has led to an unavoidable conclusion. The city has failed to properly maintain Forest Park. Sadly, this could have been said any time over the last 15 years, and it certainly can be said now with the challenges that the Park Bureau's budget is facing. And the City Club ends on hopefully a bit of an optimistic note. It describes the management plan as a remarkable blueprint that contains comprehensive recommendations for managing the park. Many of those recommendations are unfunded. The problems that existed in 1995 are largely still with us. But the good news is the recommendations are highly relevant. Recommendations as to the uses in the park. Okay, that's 2010. That one actually does get a little bit of a reaction from the city. The Parks Bureau puts out it's a rather lengthy report that it calls Desired Future Condition. What do we want the park to look like in 25 years? What's our goal here? And when read in conjunction with the management plan, Desired Future Conditions was all about setting priorities as to how we go about enhancing, improving, preserving the park. And the Parks Bureau had kind of one eye peeled to the corner saying, look, there's a group of stakeholders who have convened to form a Forest Park single track advisory committee. Mountain biking is what that is. And it's evaluating the potential for creating additional opportunities. And here's what the Parks Bureau says about it at that time. Whatever recommendations come out of this committee, and I'll jump ahead, nothing was ever implemented, but whatever comes out of this committee must improve both the cycling experience and the ecological health of Forest Park. So this is another theme you see time and time again. We're going to touch this park. We're going to improve the park. That's what we're going to do. Okay. Then 2011, Portland Parks and Recreations releases another document. They've got the prettiest covers on these documents that they issue. And this one's called the Ecological Prescription, and it sets management strategies and benchmarks for the ecological goals in the management plan, and also says before we are going to have any expanded use, you have to be in compliance with the ecological goals. Okay, and then the wildlife report. This is one that had long been anticipated, comes out in 2012, and the whole idea is this is going to be the start on establishing a baseline, right? So we know what species are in the park, and instead the report says, look, the wildlife monitoring we were supposed to do, it's not all working, and in many cases we never started it. We never put wildlife monitoring in action. The report ends up identifying key gaps in wildlife information, and when you look at this, it just makes you kind of depressed as to how wide these gaps are. The gaps include information about the presence or absence of a species. A species? Not how many of them, but at any rate, breeding status and success, where species are in the park, how species use the habitat, how wildlife respond to park management efforts, details of habitat. You could say, I mean, this is all stuff the Parks Bureau is saying we need. We need to make decisions about how we're going to use the park. And there was a member of the committee that produced this wildlife report who had, I think, some very important things to say. Nancy Broshot, I I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly, the chair of environmental studies at Linfield, said, look, what we know of the science here tells me that any additional trails, whether they're for bikers or whether they're for hikers, could have serious negative consequences for the park. Until we know about the actual biological status of the park, adding any additional use could put the park over the tipping point, so that it will no longer be able to function as a normal forest ecosystem. And very, I think, profound. Okay, 2013, enter the city club, resume nagging one more time. The city club tells the council, we urge you to fund studies on park health and current recreation use. Those studies are consistent with and indeed required by the management plan. But have they been performed? No. Okay, now I'm going to get into PG's proposal a little bit and then do Q&A for a couple of minutes, okay? So, but I want you to have PG's proposal in the back of your head. PG made this proposal and started in 2024. It was submitted to city planning because these are zoning issues. It got kicked back because the plan was not adequately detailed and was resubmitted with additional detail in November of 2024 to the city. PG's was making a proposal for phase 3 of what is a 5-phase proposal. So the 5 phases start down with the Harborton substation and improving aspects of the substation. Phase, I don't even remember what phase 2 was, but it's done. And then phase 3 is to log a 4.7 acre section of the north unit. That land contains a mature conifer and broadleaf forest. And what do I mean by that? I mean things like Douglas fir and the red cedar and plants like that. Mature oak trees are there, but it's definitely a mature forest. How did PG get to 4.7 acres? Because it wants to manage, or is proposing to manage in perpetuity, a 125-foot wide area underneath the power lines that it wants to install. This will give you a feel for what was going on here. Okay, you're headed out St. Helens Road. You may never have been on Marina Way. It's this little tiny road that parallels St. Helens Road for a few blocks. And to your right is the Harborton substation. You get up here a little bit more and you're looking at the Sovey Island Bridge. So what is in place right now are some lines that were put in many years ago. First of all, the lines that are in white are Bonneville power lines, and they run all the way up the hill and over the top of the hill. These are existing lines. Also, PGE has existing lines. They are the top set of lines here, and they eventually connect with Trojan. These lines and the easement the city gave PGE to build these lines was in anticipation of a constant source of power from Trojan. And we know now, of course, how that worked out. What the proposal is basically a 2-part proposal. Is first of all, PGE is proposing to upgrade the lines on the existing lines that it has. We didn't have much of an objection to that. We thought that was a good idea, so long as it was done in a way that didn't damage the park. We thought that was positive. The second was PG wanted to build new lines instead of I think this is actually mislabeled. Anyway, these are high voltage power lines and wanted to run them next to the BPA lines and run them up over the hill. Why? PGE is saying unless we put those lines in, we are going to have rolling blackouts in Portland in 2028. We can see in the future that that is what's going to happen. That's why we need these lines in. There were some people there were a lot of marches and things like that held, and there were some people who thought PGE actually had a very different motivation, and they thought PGE's motivation was that these lines were going to go to feed the power demands of the data centers in Hillsborough. And there is some evidence for that, and thankfully the city council didn't have to resolve that. So what PGE is saying, this is courtesy of the Northwest Examiner, the best newspaper in Portland, the Northwest Examiner. Cranky, but best. And the Examiner drew this circle around the trees that were going to be cut down if PGE's proposal went through. So you can see the PGE lines here, and you can see the BPA lines over there, and everything in the middle was going to be cut. Now, PGE, as you know, lost, and I'm going to go right to the bottom line here and tell you a little bit about the process. This all started with PGE's application going to city staff. And by city staff, some people from parks, some people from planning, urban forestry was involved, various entities within the city that had some sort of jurisdiction over what was going to be going on here. City staff wrote a lengthy report, about 110, 120 page report. And it is really kind of a thing of art. It would make you proud to live in the city if you read that report. It was thorough, it was detailed, and very considerate of the needs to protect the park. City staff concluded that PGE's proposal would have violated 16 separate requirements, zoning criteria, most of which were in the management plan. If PGE failed even one of those 16, it wouldn't be able to build. So the city staff recommendation goes to a hearing officer, and the hearing officer in February of 2025 rejected all 16 recommendations of city staff and recommended that PGE's proposal be allowed. It was a very disappointing prospect for those of us who were involved in this, and there were a lot of people involved. At this level of where city staff was weighing in, you had over 100 people who submitted written comments. 100. Over 1,000 people who submitted written comments to the city. There are lots of people. This is a ground roots effort with people coming in from all different backgrounds. So people appealed the decision of the hearing officer, and then a hearing was held by the city council. So this was not new to the city council. City council had been hearing from both parties for some time, and the city council ends up by a 12-0 margin rejecting the hearing officer's report and rejecting PGE's application. And I will tell you why in a moment. PGE has now appealed the City Council's decision to the Land Use Board of Appeals. LUBA is the administrative agency of the state that hears land use issues. Once LUBA rules, any party can appeal to the Oregon Court of Appeals. We actually were surprised PGE appealed. But if you think about it, the notion of PGE appealing here may say something about how legitimate the 2028 rolling power blackouts is concerned. We have lawyers in the room. Anybody? God, I can say anything I want. Yeah, okay. Trust me on this. If you have to go through LUBA and then into the Court of Appeals, it's going to be at least a couple of years to get through this process. And there's no way, even if PGE won, that it could be providing power through those lines in 2028. So at any rate, this is now sitting before LUBA. Nobody's filed any briefs yet. Probably won't come out of LUBA this year. Probably be the start of next year before it finally does come out. So, questions?
The word mitigate, I kind of know what it means, but I don't. And so I kind of lost almost everything you said there. So can you just give me a definition?
In the context of this, mitigate
means you limit the harm that you are doing, and where you are inevitably doing something that poses harm, then you try to make up for it someplace else.
Make up for it. So you do something in the park?
Yes, you would do something
In the park, for example, one of the things PG proposed here is that it could mitigate by pulling English ivy off of trees in the south management unit.
I got it. Okay. I got it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes.
You said the hearing officer's decision overturned by the city council. I was a little confused about that. Now it has been overturned, but what made the hearing officer decide that it was okay to do all the things that city staff concluded that they shouldn't do?
I was really fundamentally disappointed in reading the hearing officer's decision. Look, I've won cases, I've lost cases. I've been practicing 45 years as a lawyer, and I'm used to reading things and not having an emotional reaction to them. But this was just fundamentally disappointing. What she would do with issue after issue after issue is recite PGE's arguments, recite the opponent's arguments, and then without providing any rationale in a sentence or two would say PGE has met its burden of proof. And it was, for most of those 16 issues, it was impossible to tell why she ruled what she ruled. It was really disappointing.
The hearing officer, is that a appointed position, or what?
And, I don't know the answer to that. I know
The hearing officers are selected. There is a city function that is called hearings. And I don't know if she's a lawyer. I don't know if she's in private practice or a full-time city employee. I know she doesn't have a long background in land use law because I checked that out, but okay. Yes, sir.
Just for how did Bonneville and PGE get the original easements through the management.
How did they get easements? Because they were negotiating.
With Frank Ivancy. Ivancy is the mayor who signed the easements. The easement that was given to PGE in perpetuity, PGE had to pay $30,000 for. Even adjusted for inflation, that's not much. This was just, we want to get that Trojan power up over that hill. That's what was going on.
The sites that have been examined. You're getting to that. You're getting to that.
Hang on.
We will get there.
Does anybody have number 3?
Curious about the rock removal at the foot of St. John's Bridge. I think it's called Ninth Removal. Seems to have been, it's a quarry that's been removing stone from the west side of Highway 30 since at least the early 70s. I'm wondering if that is their private land that just runs to Forest Park.
I don't.
Wish I could help you.
You need to go find out and report back.
Okay. So why did the council rule against PGE? Here's the council's view of life, what we're talking about. And this, by the way, is a beautifully written opinion written by the city attorney, no doubt. It's about 110 pages long. I'll send that to you as well. But it starts by saying, look, PGE, Forest Park is a very unique natural resource. It's an extension of the coastal range that runs down into the Willamette Valley and provides a confluence of a coastal Doug fir hemlock forest, the Tualatin Valley, and the Willamette River floodplain. The council goes on to say that the park has a native biodiversity that's rarely found. I think you could say never. There's more than 170 species of birds and 53 species of mammals. They didn't include the amphibians, but one of them will become very important in just a moment. And 240 species of flora in the park. So the council is starting off by saying, look, we've got something really special here on our hands. What PGE wants would require the removal of 376 living trees. Those trees were as much as 150 years old. And 21 dead trees. Why is it listing dead trees? Because there's carbon sequestration in dead trees. And describes what the 4.7 acres concern, and then goes on to say this will result in disturbance to and elimination of wildlife habitat, sensitive fauna, nesting brooding areas, and establish woodland vegetation. There will be long-term impacts as well as short-term impacts, says the county or the city. And really, I want you to think of the long-term impacts in a very simplistic way here. This is a forest that has trees that have been around for 50, 75, 100 years, right? There's a canopy. What PGE wanted to do was to get rid of the canopy. There's an ecosystem that has developed over 50, 75, 100 years under that canopy. And you open that up and you're going to fundamentally change what's there. And that is what the city is saying here. The city council focuses a bit. I promised an amphibian. Here's his. Focused a bit on the red-legged frog, the western red-legged frog. A wildlife biologist by the name of Bella Alden wrote something that became Exhibit 639, there were over 10,000 pages of exhibits in this case. And she says these frogs have a federal species, they are a federal species of concern, and retroactive conservation actions aren't sufficient to conserve this species. PGE says a couple of things about the frogs because it's pretty clear part of the habitat for the frogs is in one of the two streams that PGE was going to disturb. PGE, first of all, says, we've been up there, we've looked, and we haven't seen any frogs. That's kind of a translation, but that's what they said. And the second thing is we can move them. And so the city council wasn't too impressed with that.
Real quick, I had a patient who lived in Forest Park and came down and was treated at the Oregon Burn Center. How many humans do you think live in Forest Park?
Nobody seems to know. We've asked that question.
Of parks, and nobody seems to know. You do see stories of it. I mean, wasn't there a fellow and his daughter who? No, that was your patient? Yeah, and lived there for
A long time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then disappeared. She got all the treatment she needed, and then
Got the treatments and then
they
left. Yeah.
disappeared.
I mean, you do
see people living in the park, and even now. You go up to what used to be the Japan Institute, White Dove, wasn't it? It's White Dove, right? White Shield. I always get that wrong. And there's definitely people living in the forest up above there. Okay, so the council is not satisfied with the city's protection of the frog. It's a nice looking frog though, I mean, we gotta say. So now the city council dives into the criteria of the management plan and says first, you have to meet the minor criteria in the plan in order to have an exception. And one of the minor criteria is you have to need to do this. There must be a demonstrable need. And PGE says, yeah, we need it. 2028, rolling blackouts. And the council does not accept that. Council says there's persuasive and substantial evidence in the record, including PGE's own load growth forecasts that don't substantiate the imminent blackout claims that PGE is making. It's referring to Paul Madgut's testimony. Paul is a retired lawyer for Bonneville Power, who's one of our group of 8, and he actually went through all of PGE's load growth forecasts filed with the Public Utilities Commission and was able to establish this. This whole thing is really, the opposition to this is a testament to volunteerism. It really is. This is impressive so many different ways. Okay, I'm not going to go through all this because it's kind of running short on time, and but I will tell you that the council finds that, look, while there may be general needs for additional power, what you have not shown us is that this specific project in this specific location is going to ameliorate those power problems. Okay. Secondly, another of the minor criteria is that biodiversity has to be enhanced, and the city council isn't buying that either. The council says that it does not find evidence in the record that supports that putting an oak woodland in lieu of a highly diverse and irreplaceable mature conifer forest habitat would be a net gain for biodiversity. And I have to show you this just because I'm really proud of it. The council and the hearing officer both cite this passage twice in their opinion, and I wrote it. So that's why I'm proud of it. And it says, without the benefit of a before and after scientific study of the area it wants to clear cut, PGE argues that the proposed project will increase biodiversity and expand sensitive woodland resources better suited for a warming climate. This is a mind-boggling claim. This may not be the first time a utility has said something like, clear-cutting high voltage power lines and more power generation will increase biodiversity, but it certainly is the first time the claim has been made about Forest Park. I still am way too proud of that sentence. My wife takes that stuff out of everything I write, so the fact I got it through, I'm very happy. Okay, another of the minor criteria is the proposal has to enhance habitat, and this is saying this project not only removes the habitat that exists, but eliminates a piece of the wildlife movement corridor in favor of a built utility corridor. This again, focusing on the migration issue that has to be complied with. Another of the minor criteria, we're still under the first exception, is that whatever the development is has to repair the ecosystem. And the council ends up saying repair doesn't mean destroy. Okay, and that's what you're proposing to do. Okay, wildfires, which concerned many people. I will tell you, after looking at all of the exhibits on wildfire, it's very tough for me to tell whether or not either of these, leave it alone, put the new lines in, which of those is the better. I do tend to think leave the area alone is, but there's not a lot of science on this, unfortunately. But I'll tell you what the council found. The council said, look, we know PGE, you're willing to provide some funding for removing ladder fuel, and that could decrease the fire risk in Forest Park. But that doesn't assuage concerns about how the removal of a closed canopy forest and conversion into a utility corridor with additional poles and conductor will increase park safety overall. And also, the council points out, look, one of the most dangerous things here is to have a grassland and invasive weeds, you know, Scotch broom, blackberry, those things, the English. That's the real fire risk here. And you know what, PGE? We kind of know how you're going to manage that risk because we've looked at those lines on the other side, the ones that you've had up since Frank Ivensey gave you that easement. And you know what's there? Scotch broom, blackberries, ladder fuels are there. So we can judge what your commitment to this by what you've done. Okay, the alternatives issue. The council finds that in fact, first of all, it makes a really important finding that, skip through a little bit of this, but the council finds that the management plan means exactly what it says. If there are no alternatives outside the park, then you might be able to build inside the park if you meet all the other criteria. But no alternatives means no alternatives. PGE was arguing that no alternatives meant no alternatives that are within roughly the same price range. And that's not what the management plan says. The management plan says, and I'm translating, if you can build it outside of the park, build it outside of the park. And where would it go? I don't have a map, unfortunately, but PGE's own consultant identified two viable alternatives. And they would both run, remember I pointed out Marina Way? They would both run along Marina Way. PGE already has poles there, and would run up to Newberry Road. And once you get to Newberry Road, you're out of the park, and then would run up the hill alongside Newberry Road, where there are PGE power lines running right now. Those are the alternatives. And PGE said, too expensive. And the council said, expense is not going to be a factor in this case. So mitigation, remember mitigation is a requirement. The city council says you can't cut down 150-year-old trees and mitigate that harm in the northern unit of the park. That's simply impossible to do. And the council goes on at some length, very concerned about how you mitigate permanently filling in wetlands, two wetlands. And okay, I'll just zip through this real quick. Oh, once again, PGE finds its own track record coming up to hit it. PGE proposes a 5-year maintenance and monitoring program for the, wanted to plant Oregon white oak saplings here, otherwise known as a salad appetizer for deer. And there actually were people who run oak nurseries who wrote in to say, there's no way those trees are going to survive in that environment. Okay, so, and then a long-term site maintenance plan with no metrics or no assurances, which is concerning given the slow-growing nature of oak trees. They take 75 to 100 years to mature. PGE's power line corridors existing in Forest Park are dominated by dense populations of invasive weeds. Again, PGE's own conduct coming up to hit it. Okay, and the result? Unanimous city council decision to reverse approval for PGE. So why don't I just, that's a good breaking point.
Yes.
Questions or
Does
not?
anybody have? Anybody? Yes. Al, go ahead.
Is PGE still owned by Scottish Power or somebody overseas?
That was Northwest Natural.
Oh,
Yeah,
who owns PGE?
I think it's a public, does anybody, I think it's a publicly traded company. It's definitely a for-profit
Company. Oh, really? Okay. Well, we can say pretty much anything we want now. So.
All right. Anybody
Any
else?
other questions? Okay.
So
now,
I'd like to ask-
last, before I leave, just one last thing. This is not going to go away. The pressures on Forest Park are not going to go away. I encourage everybody to get involved. There are some groups that are very good that are out there, the Forest Park Conservancy, the Bird Alliance. Those two groups, along with our coalition, were the ones who engaged the city as much as possible. Try to get involved some way or another. There were thousands of volunteer hours put into opposing this, and the result may well have been different if people didn't put in all the time. So anyway, I'm done now. So,
Thank you.
thank you.